So today we'll be looking at the concept of sample size. As researcher, one of the very important key when it comes to your research endeavor is for you to be able to determine the appropriate sample size you are expected to use in any study that you intend to embark upon. The sample size is so important to the extent that the quality of your generalization and the appropriateness of that generalizations usually lies in your ability to use the appropriate sample size. Many a time you see postgraduate students at master's and PhD level. You ask them, why did you make use of 150 teachers? The person will not be able to establish the reason behind that particular decision. Why do you make use of 200 teachers? Why do you make use of 400 teachers? The person will not be able to establish the fact. In research, it is compulsory that when you are deciding on the sample size that you intend to use, you must have a concrete justification. Fine, you may decide to use 1,000, you may decide to use 100, you may decide to use 50, nobody cares. But the most important thing is that there should be a methodological justification that shows that for this study, 50 sample is appropriate for this sample. For this study, 20 sample size is appropriate. For this study, 10 sample size is appropriate. Or 200 or 250 is appropriate for the study to be able to make generalization about the results of the study. Now, when we say sample size determination, before we have what is called population of study. When we say population of study, there are those set of people in which we intend to generalize our results about. For example, if you have the intention of looking at the impact of job satisfaction on teachers' productivity in Nigeria or in Lagos State, since the domain that your study intends to cover is Lagos State, all teachers in that particular state becomes the population of your study. Since your study is centered about job satisfactions and teachers' productivity in Lagos State, all teachers in Lagos State becomes the total population of your study. If you are interested in Nigeria, the total populations of teachers in Nigeria becomes the population of your study. So, but however, the reality of it is that it is not possible for you to collect data from all teachers in Lagos State. It is not possible as a result of numerous factors that might hinder your ability to do so. Because of this, there is no need for you to now determine, how do I get the appropriate sample? Okay, based on what is on ground, it is not possible for me to get data from all the teachers in Lagos State, though they constitute my population of study. But the reality is that the time you have may not permit you to be able to do that, and some other factors too that is out of your reach may not permit you to be able to get to all the teachers in Lagos State. In that case, there now comes in the idea of, okay, can I get a portion of the teachers in that particular location, in that particular geographical territory, and the portion I'm getting, they will represent to a larger extent they will represent the population of that particular study. And in ensuring that, it means that if the sample you want to take, those teachers you want to use as sample, they must also fall within the characteristics of the population of teachers that you're also using. For example, if the study is teachers, the impact of teachers, job performance on teachers' productivity among public secondary school in Lagos State. It means if you are taking population, if you are taking your sample, you cannot use teachers in private school. You have said that your population is teachers in public school. Definitely, when you want to take your sample, you cannot say that you go and use teachers in private school in Lagos State because each of these set of people, they work with different nomenclature, they work with numerous or different job satisfactions conditions or criteria. So for you to make sure that your sample size becomes appropriate, you need to make sure that the characteristics of the subject or your respondent that you have in your sample is the same with the one you have in your population. Number two is the ability for you to make sure that you get the magic number, the appropriate number that will represent that particular population of study. If you have 1,000 teachers in public school in Lagos State, are you going to use 50? Can I have your opinion? Are you using 50, 20, 30? Hello, you can unmute yourself if you intend to answer the question. You can unmute and signify by raising up your hand. Let's assume you have 1,000 teachers in Lagos State. What is appropriate for us to use? Is it 50? Is 50 okay? Is 100 okay? Or 20 okay? Okay, Modupe, I think you want to. Are you speaking?
Yes, sir. I'm
Okay.
thinking like let's say 20, sir, or 25. So I'm able to get the result from each of them. Is that okay, sir?
You said?
I'm thinking like 20 to 25. I can't meet. I may not be able to meet up with all the 1,000 teachers in the whole of Lagos.
Okay. So how many are you taking? 25.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any other opinion? Thank you for the mute yourself.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you for the answer. Any other opinion?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you have the floor.
If we have 1,000 teachers, then our sample data should be 100.
Okay. If I will ask you and Modupe, why do you think you want to take 25? And Adeton, why do you think you want to take 100? Why do you think you want to take 100? And then Modupe, why do you think you want to take 25? Can you explain yourself better so that I will be on the same page with you people?
All right, sir. I'm thinking of 100 because we'll have to consider the schools in Riverine, schools in the cities, to touch all the nooks and Lagos is wide, so to touch all the nooks and crannies, we'll have to consider all these things. Schools in the Riverine area, those in the villages, and those in the cities and towns like that. Don't forget we have public schools and we have secondary schools. So looking at all these factors together, I think 100 should work.
Okay.
Based on the examples you have given.
Okay, Modupe, can I have your view so that we can be on the same page?
Okay, sir. Well, like she has just explained, the reason why I actually mentioned below the number, I'm looking at that is it possible for me to move around all the codes, to get so I'm able to get the exact information I need and work with it effectively. I wouldn't want larger number in a way that I will not be able to get the information I need. So if I have the ones I can work with, it help me to get accurate information I need. That's what I'm thinking, sir.
Okay, thank you, Modupe. Thank you, Aditon. You can mute yourself. You are both correct because it depends on a lot of factors. It depends on what kind of research you are doing. So the kind of research that you are embarking upon, or the kind of research approach that you are using, is also a factor that influence the sample size that you use as far as any studies is concerned. Like I said earlier, a sample is like a subset of the population. And this sample size must be able to represent, in characteristics, it must be able to represent the actual population of study. And like I said, that because of the fact that it is not possible for you to collect data or to collect information from every members of the population due to numerous factors, it will make you to look for that sufficient numbers of respondents that will be okay, that will be standard for you to be able to embark on your study and generalize the result of that particular study. And I also made mention of the fact that your sample size, the sample you are drawing, must represent the population, meaning that the sample size is a subset of that particular larger population of study. And I have said that if your intention is to look at public school teachers in Lagos State, then it will not be okay, or it will not be ideal for you to now say you want to collect data from private school teachers. Because why? When you talk about job satisfaction, they work under different conditions, they work under different job criteria, and as such, the same information, when you give both of them the same information, they are going to give you different response. For example, if you want to know maybe they are satisfied with their job and you ask somebody in public school that, do you think, or are you satisfied to retire in the teaching profession? At least if you get a questionnaire on that and you send it to about like 100 public school teachers, at least you are going to have 70 of them that will tell you yes, 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 because they believe that the job is pensionable, at least the salary is manageable, and then they know that by the time they get to level 15, level 14, a lot of magic comes to the salary where they can start to earn a lot more. And if they finally becomes a PAM sec, they get a lot of opportunity, they can become TGPS, they can become, and the likes. But somebody in private school, especially in the rural community where their salary is just peanuts, and you answer the same question, do you think you can retire in this particular job? The answer will be, in fact, if you take 100, out of the 100, it's possible for you to see 99 that will say no. So that's the reason why you must always make sure that the sample that you are picking must be an exact representation of the study population. Now, what are the factors that influence the sample size? We can have the same topic, but our sample size may be different. For example, Modupe in his own case, he decided that 25 respondents is okay for him. Is also correct. And that person decided that 100 sample size is okay for him. It depends on certain factor. One, if Modupe decide to look at that particular topic from a qualitative approach, where he believes he want to make use of interview instead of collecting quantitative or questionnaire data, in that case, that 25 is okay for that particular study. But in the case of Adeton, that she intends to carry out a quantitative study. In that case, that may not be enough or may not be sufficient for that particular approach. Also, we have analytical method. There are some method of analysis that by default, they require larger numbers for your result to be sufficient or for your result to be substantial. For example, most of the time, if you look at those in the field of structural equation modeling, there's a lot of argument about the researchers, but there's a line of convergence where some people will say, at least if you are working on structural equation modeling, say you can use something around 200, blah, 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 and the likes. Though there are a lot of argument, divergence of opinion on how you get the sample size when it comes to. Now, when you get to some other studies that may not be structural equation modeling, sometimes 150 could be okay, and so on. Also, at some other point, the numbers of variables or how complex the variable is also determine the kind of the sample size that you are going to use. For example, a conceptual model that is so complex that have up to like 15 to 20 independent slash mediating and moderating variable. In studies like that, it is possible that you make use of more sample size. And also, you need to also consider the time and resources. Your master's program, your PhD program is time bound. Maybe you have a team to run the program. In that case, you must always make sure that anything, any kind of study you want to design, any kind of approach you want to use, you must also consider that, do I have the time? If you have the time, do I have the resources? All these factors must be considered. You may have the time, but do you have the resources? You may have the resources. Do you have the time? So all these things need to be considered. Then you need to also consider your completion rates, your completion rates. Then also your research supervisor also determines a lot of things as far as your study is concerned. For example, if your research supervisor is interested in MIS method, where you collect data, you collect quantitative, you collect qualitative, or your supervisor is interested in qualitative study, all these are factors that will influence the sample size that you intend to use. Irrespective of all these factors, that doesn't mean that there is no empirical approach. All the factors that we are listing must one way or the other align with the empirical approach that you are going to adopt in collecting the data. Then we also have sample size used in previous studies. If you look at part of the approach or strategy of determining sample size is for you to look at, okay, we have what are in these areas of human endeavor, or in this field of research, or in this field of knowledge, the previous studies that have been carried out in this area, you can try to review them and look at, okay, what is the sample size that they have used. In our last class, we talked about literature review, where I talked about data extraction table, where I says that you are going to take each paper and try to analyze the methodology, the sample size, country of study, blah, blah, blah. So under the sample size, maybe you try to take 3 or 4 papers and then you analyze them. After analyzing them, you realize that, okay, the first paper that was written by Modupe 2025 on the issue of teacher job satisfaction and teachers' productivity, Modupe make use of what? 250 sample size. In the work of Adetohun 2018, he made use of 150 sample size. In the work of Collins 2017, on the same topic, he made use of 170. Now, we have 150, we have 170, we have 200. So you can now look at it and say, okay, if you look at the nature of what they are using, you can see that none of them made use of sample size that is below 100. They are using sample size of what? 100 and above. So based on that, they are using a sample size between 100 and 200. Based on that, you can also say that, okay, based on that and other factors, I want to use a sample size that is higher than 100, but however it will be less than 200. Standing on the existing protocol that previous studies in this area have also used sample size within the range of 100 and 200. Then the last one is the unit of analysis. The unit of analysis is that your target variable that you intend to generalize your findings on. For example, in the case of the first example I said, where I said that we want to look at the impact of teacher job satisfaction on productivity, teachers' productivity. The teachers in that case becomes a unit of analysis. The unit of analysis sometimes also determine the sample size. For example, in the case of tourism study, those in the field of tourism and hospitality, let's now assume that we want to look at users, the tourists. Maybe we want to look at their intention to come for tourism in a particular location. For example, we want to look at their intention to patronize some geographical site in Ogun State or some gardens or the slave trade point at Badagry Tourist Center. One of the problems with tourism study or studies in hospitality is that there's always a problem in determining the sample frame, because people just come, go in, come in, go in, come in, go. So at the end of the day, it's difficult for you to get the actual population and the likes. And in that case, it is always recommended that in situation like that, you can say, maybe we rely on previous study, or maybe we try to look at, what is the minimum sample size? Then from the minimum sample size, we can now decide to move ahead to now say, if we make use of G power, if this is the minimum sample size, then we can move ahead to now say, in line with other studies, the minimum sample size is 150. Other studies have used 250. They have made use of 300. Then let's make use of 200, because the calculated minimum sample size is 150. But other studies make use of 200, 300. Okay, it means we can increase our 150 to a larger number by, let's say we can have 20% to 30% of the minimum sample size, which also have argument in literature, because some researcher will tell you that even if you determine your sample size, which is 100, that you can add 10% of 100 to it, 20% of 100, 50% of 100, in order to capture for non-response error. Because sometimes when you go out to distribute questionnaire, some people can collect the questionnaire, they will not fill it. And in that case, that will be -1 out of the questionnaire you are trying to distribute. So for you to not factor in, for you to preempt the problem, there is need for you to add additional percentage to the minimum, so that at the end of the day, you will be able to what? You will be able to have a standard. So now here we have previous study recommendation. Sometimes you have to consider it as far as this, when it comes to sample size determination, is concerned. Also, for exploratory studies, sometimes you cannot use sample size that is less than 50. And also, as far as simple regression is concerned, at least 50 sample or 100 is generally acceptable, as noted by Air 2018. That doesn't mean that you should go and use 100 or 50, because we are just giving you some argument. This one, when it talks about minimum, that is the least. So being the least doesn't mean it's the best, but it's just the least. Also, it was also argued, according to Gofford 1954, that a minimum sample of 200 could be okay for Pearson correlation, while for pilot study pretest, you can always use 5 to 10% of the actual study sample. And when you are collecting your data for your pilot study, you must make sure that the data you are collecting, for example, if you are working on teachers in public schools, when you want to collect your initial pilot study is expected to be collected before the actual study. Most people, they will say, oh, let me go and collect. If my pilot study is 20 and my actual or my real sample is 200, yes, now let me collect 120. Then I will take 20, I will remove 20, I will run the pilot study, and then I will report it, then I will now run my actual study. That is not accepted. The purpose of the pilot studies is for you to be able to see some problems, to see some challenges with your questionnaire, or to spot some challenges and problems and barriers that might occur as a result of your process of data collection. So sometimes it could be that your questionnaire is poorly developed, or the quality of language that you have used in questionnaire can be ambiguous, could lead to a lot of issue. Because of this, it is always been recommended that you embark on pilot study. During this pilot study, you will be able to see a lot of challenges. Some people will call you to order and say, no, this question is not okay. This question is too long. This question is not appropriate. This question is not testing that variable that you want to test. When all these things are raised before your actual study, you still have the benefit to still go back to the drawing board, adjust your questionnaire, adjust your data collection strategy, and go back to the field to collect the actual data. So if you now try to overlook the pilot study and the benefits behind that, the benefits behind it, at the end of the day, it may later lead to larger problem which may affect your result. Because when the item, if you have problem with the item, with the questionnaire, it will affect the quality of the data that will be collected. It will affect the quality of the result and then the result and the findings. So in that case, but if you are able to be truthful with the pilot study usually have the potentiality of identifying some of these problems that you are going to face in your actual data collection. So immediately it is identified, your responsibility is for you to now sit down. When you sit down, you now collect the questionnaire before going to the actual study. Also, we have various approaches to sample size. Part of the approach that we have is what we call sample to item ratio. This sample to item ratio is generally recommended for exploratory study. So what he is trying to say, and if you look at the scholars that suggested it, we have it there, that says that the ratio should be between ratio 5 to 1. So if I have one item in my questionnaire, I need 5 respondents. If I have 2, I need 10 respondents. If the item in my questionnaire is 5, then I need 25 respondents. If the item on my questionnaire is 30, then I need 50. Also, another approach suggested that no, that 5 to 1 ratio is too small. They now suggested 20 ratio 1, meaning if I have one questionnaire item in my questionnaire, I will use 20 respondents. If I have 2 item questions, I will use 40. 2 item question, maybe I have one question that says that, do you intend to retire as a teacher in this job? If I only have that one question, I will use 20 respondents. If I have another question that says that apart from the one that talks about retirement, is the working condition okay and suitable for you? That is 2 questions. If I have 2 questions, then I will use 40 respondents. So using our 30 item analogy that I mentioned earlier in ratio 5 to 1, if we have 30 items, it means the appropriate sample size to use is 600 respondents. So in essence, it is better to make use of the higher ratio because the higher ratio is going to give you a larger sample size. And the larger the sample size, the larger the quality of the result, and the higher the reliability of your analysis at the end of the day. Another approach that we have is what we call the sample to variable approach. So the sample to variable approach, we have the one that's the sample to variable approach. We have the one that argue that we are a ratio 5 to 1. If I have one variable, then I can make use of 5 respondents. If I have 2 variables, for example, if I have 2 variables like job satisfaction, teachers' productivity, then I can use 10 respondents. However, on the ratio of sample to variable ratio approach, the minimum that is suggested is that of ratio 5:1, while it is always better to use higher ratio level, such as 15:1 or 20:1. So that is that about that. Any question? Any question? So if there is no questions, I will reestablish my point by saying that, like I said, that it is always good to use the higher ratio, because the lower ratio may affect the impact of the result. It is usually okay and it is usually nice for you to use higher ratio. When you use higher ratio, it it improves the quality of your work, because the rule of large number is that the larger the number of sample size you use, the larger the normality or the normalcy of your data, and this will definitely have impact on the quality of your results and generalization of your result. Then the next one we also have is what we call the KG and Morgan table. If you are with your phone over there, everybody Google KG and Morgan table. You are with your phone, you are with your laptop, Google KG and Morgan table. If you can see it, let me know. If you cannot, let me know. Google it and tell me, okay, sir, I've seen it. So if you see it, put it on the chat box, sir, I've seen it. So in the next 3 minutes, please do that. KG and Morgan table. Google it on your phone or your laptop.
KG.
So if you have seen it, put it on the chat box. I've seen it.
KG. Okay. Mhm. This is my problem with this phone. And the network is on this phone. I'm saying the answer is on it.
Hello, class. So based on what I can see on the chat box, I think I may be about close to like maybe 7, 8, or 9 of you have been able to see the KG and Morgan table. So the KG and Morgan table is often being used in the field of most people for people in education, behavioral sciences, and social sciences. Now, the KG and Morgan table, you don't need to do any calculation. It has been the calculation has been carried out, and this table was developed for you to be able to determine your actual sample size. Now, one of the things you need to note that the KG and Morgan table, part of the assumption of using this table, you use this table when you are using probability sampling techniques like simple random sampling, systematic random sampling, stratified random sampling. When you are using it, then you have the right to use KG and Morgan. It is the appropriate choice to use. But in a situation where you are using non-probability sampling techniques, it is not appropriate. You rather go for what we call the power analysis. Now, if you look at the KG and Morgan table, we have the N, which is the population size, and we have the X, which is the sample size. So the first column is N, the population size. The second column is S, which is the sample size that you are going to use. I said that it is possible that you have a particular number, that this is the number of my population size. How do I get the actual sample size that will be sufficient for me to generalize the findings or the result of my study? So in that case, in our first example where I said that let's assume that we are looking at the impact of job satisfactions on teachers' productivity among public school teachers in Lagos State. Based on the data with Lagos State Ministry of Education, let's assume, give me a number, give me a number, give me a number. What can give me a number that, okay, what number can we assume? I want somebody to give me a number. Hello, somebody can unmute his or herself and give me a number of the possible, just guess, of total number of teachers in Lagos State. Then if you give me that number, then we'll both locate the sample size.
15.
What do you call it?
I say 1,500 teachers.
Okay. If you say 1,500 teacher, yeah, let's start from the first N, the first column. The first column, which is N, a capital letter N, start with 10, 15, 25. Let's keep going. If you go to the last number, we have 210, isn't it? Hello, are you with me?
Yes, sir.
I hope you can see my screen clearly. Isn't it?
Not
Yes,
very
sir.
clear.
Yes, sir. We can see it, sir.
Okay. Now, if you go to the next N, because we have exhausted the first N, you go to the next N, which starts with 220, 220, 230, 240. We'll go, and then let's go to the last number. The last number is 1,100. So let's move on again to the next, because we want to locate 1,005. Our population size, total population of teachers in Lagos State Public School is 1,005. So now we have to the next N, we have 1,002, 1,003, 1,004, then we have 1,005. This, since our population size, the number of teachers in Lagos State is 1,005. You can see it now. The corresponding
Yes,
sample
sir.
size, you just draw a line. If you look at it, the corresponding sample size is what? What's the corresponding sample size?
306.
3 what?
306.
306. So 306 becomes your legitimate and appropriate sample size. So that is the sample size that you are expected to use as far as your study is concerned. And I said that before you can use this sample size, there are two conditions that must be fulfilled. You must be able to have information about your population size, and then you must also be sure that you are using part of the assumption of the KG and Morgan table is that the sampling techniques that you are using must be a simple random sampling, systematic, or what is generally called probability sampling techniques, where each of the respondents have an equal chance of being a member of that particular sampling. So you need to take note of that. So 306. Now, the 306 is the sample size that you're expected to use. But you can also decide to use more than the 306. For example, getting the 306, you can decide that, okay, I want to add 10% of 306 to it to be more than 306. I want to add 20%, I want to add 30%. Each of these percentage, they have methodological arguments, and the basic idea behind them is that for you to capture non-response error that I explained earlier. However, when you are adding the percentage, maybe you're adding 50%, 20%, you must have your empirical support to justify it. If you use the 306, you are okay. Nobody will say you are not fine. You are okay. Your work is okay. It's standard. So now when we get to this page, you are going to realize that you don't just use any number. And if you say that the population of teachers in Lagos State is more than 1.5, that let's say it is 30,000. If you come down below the table, we have 30,000 here, we have 3794. And even if the number is 1 million, we have 384. So KG and Morgan argued that 384 is a magic number which is sufficient for any population that is 1 million and above. Now, we also have what is called the Green's Procedure 1991. This is another approach that suggests or that recommends on how we can get our sample size. Now, in this approach, it is recommended that our sample size should be greater or equals to 50 plus 8m. In this case, the m in that algebraic notation, or in the algebraic notation, the m refers to the number of predictors or the number of independent variables. So if you have 7 independent variables, 8 times 7 plus 50, it gives you 116. And by extension, you can also use the second notation where you have 104 plus m. If you are having one independent variable, you just, for a simple linear regression, you just add 104 plus m. M is 1 if the independent variable is 1 in a simple linear regression. If it is more than 1, in the case of multiple, then you add whatever number of independent variable you have, you add it. That is another approach. We call it the Green Procedure. And then, according to Clean 205 and 206, they also put up some arguments that when it comes to structural equation modeling, that because there's no, I said earlier that there are a lot of arguments, a lot of divergence, a lot of issues as regard if we are having a structural equation modeling analysis, what is the appropriate sample size that we are expected to use? Some people believe that sample size of 100 is considered to be small. While some researchers believe the sample size between 100 to 200 is medium, and those sample size above 200 is considered to be large. The most important thing is that whichever number you want to use, you must make sure you have an empirical justification for it. And also, you must always have it at the back of your mind that larger sample size is always better than smaller sample size, because the larger sample size gives your study the ability, gives your data the ability to have normal distribution, because the larger the sample, the greater the ability of that data to demonstrate normality. Then another issue is the issue of power analysis. I made mention of the fact that in a situation where in a situation where you don't know the population size, especially in issues like tourism studies, where in a particular tourist site, people move in, people go out, which it sometimes it may be difficult for you to capture the actual population of people that visit that particular tourist site in a day. In that particular scenario, what you are going to do is for you to make use of power analysis. The power analysis is a form of mathematical computation or analysis that will give you the opportunity to get your minimum sample size. Please take note. The sample size that we are going to get after running this power analysis is going to give us what is known as minimum sample size. Getting the minimum sample size give you a benchmark that shows that this is the minimum. However, it is better for you to look at, okay, if the minimum is 80, the minimum is 100, the minimum is 120, what do we have in similar studies that have been carried out in the past? You can use that as an argument to add more, and you can equally use the argument of adding 50% or 30% of it to capture for non-response error to also add to the minimum that you have derived. In computing the power analysis, most often we use what is called the G-Power software. And when we want to compute it, we need what is called the effect size, the significant level. We need all these things to compute the G-Power analysis. The first step is for you to download the G-Power and install on your laptop. When you download it, when you open it, before you run it, there's a portion where you have to change the test. You have to change it from the t-test to f-test. You need to change it from t-test to f-test. That is the first step. After changing, there is a place where you have to even select you have to select and change the setting to linear multiple regression. And also, there's also a place where you have to input the effect size. For example, it is recommended that the 0.15 effect size is okay. Then for the alpha, 0.5 is okay, and then for the power, 0.8 is recommended. And the last thing you are now going to do is for you to look at the number of predictors in that particular conceptual framework. Now, if you look at these particular conceptual frameworks that we are looking at, the predictor that we have here, how can we derive the predictor? You look at the predictor, each of the arrows pointing to knowledge sharing, they constitute the predictor. So in this case, if I will ask, how many independent variables, how many predictors do we have in this conceptual framework? Hello? How many predictors or how many independent variables do we have in this framework? Because I said that when you talk about the predictor, the number of independent variables that you have. And if you look at the knowledge sharing, we have 3 arrows pointing to it. So
we have 3.
We have 3. Thank you. So we have 3 predictors. So when you get to the calculation, you also input 3. Now, this is an example of G-power analysis. So the first thing is you have to choose the f-test, the linear multiple linear regression. Then you insert the effect size, which it is recommended you use 0.15. The probability 0.05, which is recommended. And then the power 0.80, it's also recommended. Then the predictor, you now look at it in your conceptual model. I will stop sharing. I want us to look at the practical aspect of it. Let me stop. I want us to do the practical aspect. Though I asked you to download it earlier so that you can have Can you see the G power? Hello? Hello? Can you see the G power?
Sir.
Yes, sir.
Not the PowerPoint or the G power itself.
Yes, sir. Yeah, you can see
Okay.
it, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir, we can see it.
Okay.
3.1.9.7.
Okay. Now, if you can see it, what we are going to do is that if you look at the table, if you look at the software, I said the first step is that you have to change from if you open it by default, it will come along with t-test. So what you need to do, the first thing you need to do is for you to change it at first to what? To f-test. So you come here, you come to the family of tests. You see we have f-test, c-test, z-test, square test. So you change it to f-test. Now when you come to this place, you can see that you have various method here. So now come down, you change it to linear multiple regression fixed model r square deviation from 0. Are you with me? Hello,
Yes,
are we
sir.
together?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So you click, you choose this one. Then when you come to the first size, as I said, 0.15 is recommended. For the alpha, 0.05 is recommended. For this one, 0.8 is also recommended. Then the predictor, you now determine the predictor. If it is 3, let's change it to 3. If you put 3, now we'll go to calculate. Can you see me now?
Yes, sir.
So we have calculate. Now, after the calculation, what can you see? Can you see the total sample size?
Yes,
What do you
sir.
have
Yes,
here?
sir.
What is total sample size?
77.
77.
77.
77. Okay, now let's change the predictor to, let's change it to 5. If we change it to 5, now let's calculate again. If you calculate, what is total sample size now?
92.
0.92.
No, total sample, you can see total sample size is what?
92. 92.
92.
92.
92.
Okay, now
92, sir.
let's remove the 5. Let's change our number of predictor or number of independent variable in our study to 10. If you change it to the now, let's come back to calculate again. We'll click calculate. What do you have now?
118.
118, sir.
Thank you. You are so wonderful. So we have 118 at the sample size. I said the G power, you use the G power when one, it is not easier for you to get the population size. Two, it is also, you can also use it when you are using non-probability sampling techniques. And I said that the G power, the number is going to give you is the minimum sample size that you must not go below. However, it is always recommended to go above the minimum sample size. But you can use it to argue your point that in your study, you have decided that after calculating, for the fact that you cannot determine the actual population size, then you use the G power to get the minimum. That is, this is the minimum. Now, basing your study on what previous studies have done, you are now saying that you want to increase your sample size above 118, looking at the previous study, but you know that you must not get below 118 because the minimum is 118 as far as your study is concerned. Do you understand it?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
So
sir.
just
Yes, sir.
download it, input the F test, linear multiple regression, fixed model, R square. You just pick it from the drop list, the F test from the drop list also, and then you put the 0.15. That one is given 0.05 recommended, 0.08. The only thing you just need to now determine is how many independent variable do you have. Is it 2 independent variable? Is it 3? Is it 4? Your independent variable is the same thing as your predictor. So you just input it and you press calculate. It's going to give you the sample size.
Hello, sir. Can I ask a
Okay,
question?
you have the floor.
Okay. You said grading and Amonga table. That one is already calculated already. They've already given us the number of population and the sample size. Is this
Yes.
another method of determining this G power? Is it another method of determining our sample size?
Okay, thank you. The KG and Morgan table, you use it because it's based on certain assumptions. Number one assumption is that you must know the population size. For example, in the case of teacher in Lagos State, it is easier for you, it is possible for you to know the total number of teachers in Lagos State. That is number one. Number two condition is that the sampling techniques that you want to use must be probability sampling techniques. Those two conditions must be met. A situation where you don't know your population size, like in the case of tourism study, where people come in, people go out, you cannot determine the actual population of people of the tourists using that particular location. It may be difficult for you to use the KG and Morgan table because if you want to use the KG and Morgan table and you don't know the population size, so how will you get it? Do you understand it?
Yes, I
Hello?
understand. I
Aha.
understand.
So in that case, when it is difficult for you to get, you can decide to use the power analysis that I've just done to get at least the minimum benchmark that you need.
Okay.
So that is that about that about the however, now you know if you look at this particular model, we both agree that we have three independent variables, three predictor, and we insert it in the G power analysis. It gave us this because we said that the predictor independent variable, they are those arrows pointing to the word dependent variable, and we have 1, 2, and 3. Now in the case of where you have conceptual model like this, how do you determine the predictor? How do you determine the number of predictor in this? Can I have any? Do I have any answer for it? Now, in this case, where you're having mediation, you are going to see that the knowledge sharing, we are having three arrow pointing to knowledge sharing. Student satisfaction, we are having four arrows. In this case, there is a rule, and that is the rule of maximum arrow pointing to one variable. So in this case, we are going to assume that the number of predictors that we have in this case is 4 and not 3. So that is why the G power is calculated as 4. We have the mediator. We have some first 3 arrow pointing to knowledge sharing, and then under 4 arrow pointing to student satisfaction. In this case, you are going to pick the maximum number of arrow pointing to a particular variable. So here, the student satisfaction is having the largest arrow pointing to it. So count the number of arrow and they use it as a what? Our independent variable, our predictors, number of predictor. So here, if you look at it, it's inserted as 4, and the total sample size is derived is 85. Then what if you have moderation analysis? You know, the case of the mediation is like a variable that try to transmit the chain of reaction or that explain the chain of reaction between the independent variable and the dependent variable. Now, in the case of the moderator determines the strength of relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable. So if you look at this one now, we have feedback as a moderator. Now, even in multiple regression, if you want to use multiple regression analysis to run moderation, what you are going to do is that the moderator itself will now become an independent variable. We have agreeableness to openness being our first 3 variable that we have. Now, they now insert feedback. Now, if you want to convert it to multiple regression, what you are going to do is that feedback itself will become an independent variable. That's why you can see it here. Now, you now take feedback multiply by each of the initial independent variable. They will now stand as a variable again. That is why we are having agreeableness times feedback up to openness times feedback. All of them pointing to knowledge sharing. Now, if you now count it, we have 1, 2. If you count it now, we have 1, we have 2, we have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 arrows, meaning that in this case, we are having 7 independent variables. So we have 7 independent variables. Now we are all the thing we have been discussing. We have been discussing how to determine sample size as far as quantitative studies is concerned. What of if my intention or the kind of study I'm embarking upon is interview? I'm not interested in quantitative study. What is the appropriate number of sample size that I have expected to use? Now, in the case of the interview or qualitative study, most of the time it is always recommended that there are a lot of factors that affect it. For example, if the intention of that particular study, research purpose and objective, if the intention is just for exploratory, just to look at people's perception, their views, then 10 to 20 participants is okay for you to interview. Also, in a situation whereby the nature of your research questions is also a factor that determines it. For example, if your intention is to look at issues that are complex or sensitive topic, in that case, it means that you need to deep digger in order to get deeper perspective, and in that case, it means that you may need more respondent to interview for you to get a deeper perspective. Also, a situation whereby the population of your study is heterogeneous. Heterogeneous in the sense that they are very diverse. In that case, you may need larger respondent to interview compared to when you have population of study that are not heterogeneous. Then also the methodological approach that you are using. For example, if the approach is phenomenography between 8 to 6 participants, if it is grounded theory, 20 to 30 participants, case study 10 to 20, and the likes. Also, another factor that you need to consider in sample size determination when it comes to interview is the saturation point. Saturation point is that point at which you are not getting anything new. And at that point, when you say saturation point, that point you need to stop. So all these are some of the factors that determines the kind of sample size that you can use as far as your study is concerned. Now, we have the minimum sample size that you can use, and then we have the maximum. If you look at the minimum sample size that we cited on the book, according to Guess et al. 2008, they suggested that the point of data saturation, like that I explained, data saturation is the point in your interview that you are not getting new response. For example, I ask you, why did you enroll for master in LASU? When I enter the LASU gate, I want to know why some of you enroll for master in LASU in Lagos State University. And at the gate of the university, I met one student. I asked him, why do you enroll in master's or postgraduate program in this university? He said, because the amount of money you are going to pay at least is considerate. Also, the university is located in one of the most popular cities in Africa, and also the university is located in a geographical space where I can get opportunity to some job opportunity and the likes. The lecturers are accommodating. The time frame for that program is okay and standard. There is graduate on time in the university. I'm getting that from one respondent. I get another respondent. I got similar something. After getting to like 10, 15, if after getting to the 15, what I'm getting is almost the same thing, then that means that I'm not getting nothing new again. After the 10, nobody is adding anything to it. Then in that case, it means I've gotten to my saturation point. And according to Guess et al. 2006, he said by the time you get to the 12th interview, then it is possible you start to experience saturation point. At that point, it is better for you to stop. According to Creswell 1988, it recommends that you can use between 5 to 25, especially when you are embarking on phenomenological studies. Also, when it comes to the maximum number of sample size to use in qualitative study, one in 2022 was of the argument that between sample size of 20 to 30 is okay. However, also guest et al. Also come back and tell us that though saturation point is necessary for you to stop, but he also advised that getting larger interview will enhance the quality of your result. So at this point, we are going to come to the end of the lecture. Do you have any question?